Fantastic. Our next session, diversity, equity, and inclusion in the energy efficiency sector, is a really important one. MEI is dedicated and a signatory to increasing our awareness and activity in this arena through our activity in the PACE Nation, as well as many of our partners and board members. And so we've seen this particular issue addressed, and the interesting thing here is it's not just the workforce, but it's those who are served as well. I'm really excited about this panel that we have today to help address this, give us some insights, give us some information, some tools, and some data. So right now I would like to welcome Eddie, Tracy, and Yafet to the stage, the quote-unquote stage. Unfortunately, Glenda Abney with the Missouri Botanical Gardens was going to moderate, but is unable to. So you're stuck with me. Sorry. But to kick off, I'll go ahead and introduce everybody, and then Yafet will be able to give her presentation from there. So with us, we have Eddie Pate, founder and chief inclusion and diversity officer at Eddie Pate Speaking Consulting. He has over 20 years of experience working across industries where he has transformed communities and businesses in the realm of inclusion and diversity. As an operational executive, he has utilized his inspirational leadership skills to build global organizations that understand and value the power of ID&E. His experience lies in helping drive strategic focus on inclusion, diversity, and equity to help individuals, teams, and organizations thrive. Welcome, Eddie. We have Tracy Woods. Tracy is Vice President of Operations of American Association of Blacks in Energy. Tracy Woods is an energy industry veteran with over 35 years experience. He's currently runs operations for AABE, a policy nonprofit serving 2,000 members through 36 chapters across the U.S. Before coming on staff at AABE, he ran the construction services division at Con Edison in New York City. His teams were instrumental in restoring the steam loop after Superstorm Sandy devastated the city. His leadership skills have been honed commanding substation operations at the Jersey Central Power and Light and multiple roles at Exelon Utilities in Chicago and Philadelphia. He is an electric engineer who has also worked as a lineman and substation operator and utility trainer. Welcome. Finally, our first speaker is Yafet El-Amin, Executive Director of MOCAN, St. Louis Construction Contractors Assistance Center. Yafet currently serves as that director, as a nonprofit organization that for more than 40 years has served as a vital link between minority and women-owned firms and the general construction community. Yafet has been on the forefront of advocacy issues within the St. Louis community for years. She brings decades of local community understanding and knowledge accumulated from her past tenure in the Missouri legislature, as well as her active guidance and leadership in providing training and increased business and workforce opportunities for minority businesses and workers. She's established the MOCAN Educational Institute, a state of Missouri recognized training provider that since 2015 has graduated hundreds of minorities and females in apprenticeships, construction career opportunities within the St. Louis area. Welcome, Yafet.
Thank you, Josh, for having me. And welcome to Eddie and Tracy. It's an honor to be able to be a part of the panel with you all. As Josh indicated, my name is Yafet El-Amin, and I am the Executive Director of MOCAN Construction and Contractors Assistance Center. So I'm pleased this morning to be able to speak to the level that I can about diversity in the energy sector. So I'm going to tell Josh to go through the next slide, please. Thank you. So I'd like to talk a little bit about where we are. And clearly we're living in a time of change where governments and private sectors are increasingly moving toward advancing diversity. You are hearing more now about diversity, equity, and inclusion than I have heard probably since I've been involved in diversity and inclusion. But for us, progress is still moving slow. When we talk about diversity, we are hearing a lot of communication about diversity. However, when you start to quantify diversity and qualify diversity, we see that the commitments and the action toward diversity is oftentimes lacking. The energy sector is most likely somewhat behind in the diversification trends. According to a recent survey, women account for 32% of the global energy sector workforce, while racial and ethnic minorities account for only 22%. Black and Latino individuals are also underrepresented compared to the overall population. While women make up 39% of the roles in the entry level, they only represent just 26% of all executives and corporate suite leaders. And for racial and ethnic minorities, those corporate suite leaders percentages are even below 20%. Next slide, please. So how is St. Louis making a difference? So you heard Josh mention MOCAN, and we are a non-for-profit organization that has advocated for minority contractors and workers since 1974. We had a unique opportunity in 2016 to partner with Y Green PACE program, who was looking to advance their services in the St. Louis area, to come together and do an MOU to pool our resources together and their resources together to advance opportunities for minority people in the energy sector. So our program works specifically with Y Green to expose minority contractors who would do energy sector work to those opportunities, as well as minority workers and our pre-apprenticeship graduates for employment opportunities on those energy sector jobs. The city of St. Louis, MOCAN, and Y Green, we've seen some great strides together relative to the PACE program. Our local goals, we are surpassing them with 29% of the completed projects performed by minority contractors. The partnership that we have with Y Green has successfully addressed this serious issue, bringing historically underserved neighborhoods together with access to capital. Y Green has been able to provide these affordable financing solutions for Black families in neighborhoods that basically have been left behind by traditional banks. So we believe that there are positive signs concerning advancing diversity, particularly when it comes to the energy policy that we've seen with PACE. But because PACE is new, innovative, and disruptive to traditional financing models, we've seen it it's not being weighed down by the past systematic inequities that we've seen with redlining. But we've also seen our legislature, as well as opponents, try to come and attack the program and remove the opportunities that we've had for Black communities and Black households to benefit from the PACE program. So yearly, we are pooling our resources together, fighting to save the program, and also to ensure that the opportunities for Black families and workers and businesses are not lost. Next slide, please. When we look at the city of St. Louis, as well as St. Louis County, I think it's important to know when we talk about diversity and inclusion that the underpinning of the diversity and inclusion has been through ordinances that has been passed on the local level that ensure that this diversity and inclusion occurs on all of our projects. So you see the city of St. Louis below has a 21% African-American business goal, a 2% Hispanic business goal, a 0.5% Native American and Asians goals, and then 11% female goal. St. Louis County also has a goal of 25% minority businesses and 5% female businesses. And both St. Louis City and St. Louis County also have goals for workforce and boots on the ground. So when I speak about these goals, and when I think about how do you quantify the diversity and the equity, it's done by, one, setting numbers, And then two, ensuring that those goals are monitored for the compliance and to ensure that those good faith efforts are made for those individuals who say that they want to see equity and inclusion occur. The good thing about the Y Green PACE program is that not only do they work with the city of St. Louis and St. Louis County programs as far as tracking, they also are internally tracking. And that's important. You know, any organization that is speaking about diversity and inclusion, you have to track and quantify your numbers. And so as a part of this program, they are tracking diversity within the contractor workforce in several ways, including the percentage of total workforce that are M&WBE contractors, the percentage of contractor workforce that are active. And this is done each quarter. Looking at the MBE and WBE contractors, and lastly, the percentage completed in projects by MBE and WBE contractors. So when you look at our overall goals of being 21% in the city of St. Louis and 25% in St. Louis County, earlier I spoke of the Y Green PACE program being at 29%. So we are currently exceeding the city's goals as well as the county's goals. And that's because we are intentional about inclusion. Through Y Green and MOCAN partnership, we've exceeded these goals. And now we are seeing and hearing conversations about how this model can be replicated throughout the PACE industry on a national level. So I'm proud to say that MOCAN and Y Green and St. Louis, that we are leading the conversation about equity and inclusion with the PACE program in the industry. Next slide, please. On March 18th, 2021, the National PACE Advocacy Group, PACE Nation, announced an industry-wide action plan to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in the PACE marketplace. This national effort will replicate St. Louis's pioneering PACE inclusion success to other metropolitan areas in the United States. This is critical. This is huge. This is big, because what's happening in St. Louis and the need for equity and inclusion in the energy sector has to happen on a national level. So for PACE to step up and take a commitment nationally to one, not only look at diversity and inclusion, but to also record, monitor, and track what it's doing, that's huge for private sector. Just a small quote from me, basically saying, Set the Pace St. Louis has demonstrated tremendous support for minority and women contractors through its inclusion with our scholarship initiative, with our minorities that we are training in the workforce. This has presented an opportunity for our minority and women-owned businesses and workers to gain access to financing for energy efficiency projects, expanding this access to these services for low-income communities. So I am proud that MOCAN is able to, in the small way that we can, to impact energy as it relates to providing these opportunities for disadvantaged communities and households in the St. Louis area, as well as now seeing those dollars pass on through our businesses and our local workforce. We believe that that's how you stabilize a community. And we are excited about being able to continue to take this mission further on a national level with PACE. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak this morning about diversity and energy and what we are doing here on a small level to try to impact things on a bigger level. Thanks, Josh.
Thank you so much, Yvette, for everything that you're doing. Before we move to Eddie, I know you have to run. You have a tight schedule. So there was a question. I want to make sure we get that provided to you before you have to head out. Sure. Are there particular sectors of the market that you are seeing more success in? Ideas of why that might be?
So when you talk about success in sectors, so part of our program is looking into those areas where minority contractors would be able to provide those energy upgrades. So we'll see those contractors in HVAC areas. You might see it in the roofing areas. So we've been able to see largely our mechanical and electrical companies participate very strongly with the PACE program. We also have been able to see some of our smaller general contractors who work directly with owners and improving their homes participate in the PACE program. Because of the way the PACE program is financed, it oftentimes provides them a greater access faster to be able to get those funds to the homeowners so that they can do the services on those homes. I spoke earlier about some of the challenges that we have historically seen with minority communities and the banks and redlining. I believe that because of the way the PACE program is financed, it also provides our smaller GCs an opportunity to go straight to the homeowners and present them with the program to be able to get their upgrades and the services done. So I don't know how many of you all know about St. Louis, but it's hot here. So when you are in communities where people need upgrades on their on being able to stay cool in the summertime or warm in the wintertime, the types of programs that PACE offer provides for quick access for our residents as well as our contractors who are doing work with them.
Great. There was one last question, and it was regarding you kind of addressed it a little bit, but the news regarding PACE in St. Louis, residential PACE. The question specifically was, have the issues with private lenders impacted PACE in St. Louis? And you're familiar with the articles that you participated in. Is there any comment you'd like to make on that?
So the question again was what, Josh?
Have the issues with private lenders impacted PACE in St. Louis? And
absolutely.
Yeah, the reference to
absolutely.
articles.
Yeah, I mean, literally, and I'm a former legislator myself, but literally for the last 3 years, it has been a knockdown, drag out fights in our legislatures to keep the program. The banking industry has tried and will continue to try to strip the program away. And so we have, with MOCAN, worked in concert with the local NAACP, worked with our local senators to speak up for the PACE program. I believe because the PACE program has pretty much set like record numbers as it relates to inclusion, it has presented, I guess, an easier sell for our local senators and state representatives to stand up for the program. So, I mean, even to the tune that they have filibustered in the Senate legislation that was set in to kill the PACE program. So what we've done on the ground and working together is not only the right thing to do, but it has also set the stage for stronger partnerships because the numbers are real, they're quantifiable. So when you start seeing how our businesses have benefited from the PACE program, how our residents and largely North St. Louis is a predominantly African-American area. At any time, you can see the map of projects that are funded in North St. Louis. So it has been very easy because of the work and the intentional inclusion that PACE has brought forward to have people be advocates. And when organizations like the NAACP step up and also take this on as an equity issue, it means a lot and it says a lot.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Chiefette. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Have a great day.
Okay.
I know you have to run. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Absolutely.
Was that my last question?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, it is.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Tracy and Eddie. Enjoy yourself. Thanks, Josh.
Yeah, nice job.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you for that, Eddie. The stage is yours.
All right, thank you very much. Well, this slide's been up for a little bit, so go ahead and advance past this slide, please. You just quickly, I had a quick introduction. Just, I spent the 21 years in the corporate space in companies like Amazon and Starbucks and Microsoft, a company called Avanade. It's all I've done, in my 21-year career, and there's not another topic I wanted to pursue and do in that space. So it's absolute passion for me. Next slide, please. So I'm going to be very quick. In fact, I'm going to hit my start button on my 15 minutes so I don't step on Tracy's toes. I don't want to mess with the brother's time. All right. Really, I want to have a real quick discussion on some of the things to think about regarding workforce diversity in general. And so I'll raise some issues here for you to think about as leaders, as you may be business owners, you may be folks who work and have executive roles or leadership roles where you can have an impact in the companies that you're at. So I want to just give you some things to think about. And what to expect is I'm going to do a very quick business case rationale. And I almost hate doing it because I think at this time in 2021, there's no need for having to really talk about the business case rationale because there's so much data and research and information that just shows it's super valuable. And even as Yvette was just talking about the business case rationale of what she's seeing in the St. Louis area, I mean, it just makes sense, right? So I'll talk a little bit about that. And then really, I'm going to talk about 10 things that I want you to consider and think about. And then I'm absolutely willing to pursue anything in a Q&A session after Tracy's done or whenever you want us to answer questions, Josh. So next slide, please. All right, as I said, very quick business case rationale. I love this slide because it does highlight some of the key points where there's a business case rationale. Look, doing ID&E work and making sure that you're intentionally doing this in your companies it is the right thing to do, period. It is absolutely the right thing to do, but it also has major business impacts and ROI returns for companies, whether you're talking about the investment in people, right? How do you keep people in your companies and lower attrition rates by creating inclusive workplaces? You could save so much money from just doing that. You can capitalize on diverse markets, right? Understanding who your customers are, who, the communities you're in can enable you to be even stronger and better in attracting employees, resources, money, good client, client experiences, that kind of thing. Clearly doing this, attracting and retaining the best and the brightest. Look, it's clear the more diverse an organization is, the more innovative and creative it is for creating solutions and products and for your customers and clients. I mean, there's no question. There's so much research that shows this. Again, innovation through increased creativity. And here's one that people don't talk about. It lowers mistakes and blunders that you make if you don't understand who your customer base is, who your community base is. It keeps you from making mistakes that end up impacting you in terms of who invests in your company, who spends money with your company, who sues your company, right? So there are financial and people-related benefits, period, to the business case. And there are research, empirical studies for each one of these aspects, dozens, right? So enough on the business case. I hope that you just understand that there is a clear one. So next slide. So we'll get to the meat of the discussion I want to have really quickly. What are the things I should be thinking about regarding workforce diversity? So I think one of the first things you should be thinking about if you're a leader, anyone within a business, is you should level set on what diversity, inclusion, and belonging and equity is. Your organization needs to understand the differences between these ideas, these notions. Why do we do it? What's the importance of them, so that there's no confusion? They need to understand that the more diverse your organization is, the more creative and innovative it will be. And then what I really push people to do is find a way to really illustrate that doing diversity work and diversity is more than just about race or gender. It's definitely about race and gender, but it includes so many dimensions that are both visible and invisible, right? And as leaders, what I'm going to challenge you to do in terms of creating the kind of workforce diversity that you want is to create an environment where people feel comfortable expressing who they are, so you get to know who they are. And the benefit of that is then you get to leverage that difference, right? Who has different language abilities, who's worked in different segments and sectors, who's worked geographically in different parts of the world. How do you leverage that difference to be more creative and innovative? So get to understand what your level set your organization on the value of diversity, inclusion, belonging, and equity. What is it? So they are all on the same page. A couple points I'll make quickly. Pay attention to people with disabilities. I think that is such an untapped, powerful resource that folks need to potentially use, right? And there's research after research after research that shows people with disabilities have lower tardiness. They have higher retention rates. They're just as productive as workers who don't have disabilities. Sometimes you have learning curves that are a little longer, but once folks get it, they just get it and drive. It's such an untapped potential. So if you are a leader and you're thinking about workforce diversity, if you're not talking about people with disabilities, it's a mistake. The next piece that I would recommend is make sure you're really addressing generational differences in how you hire, how you develop, how you lead, and how you engage your workforce. There are 5 distinct generations within the workplace. And for a lot of the industry, the fastest growing is the Gen Z, right? 18 to 24-year-olds. Really get to understand how you need to address these different populations so that you can, again, if you want to think about workforce diversity, how do you keep that diversity in your workplace, right? How you manage and lead someone who's like me, who's 58, right, and on a baby boomer edge right there, how I get managed and led and developed will be very different than how you do millennials or Gen Z, right? Get to understand the nuances between these generational groups so you can get even more out of what they're able to bring to the table. And there's definitely distinct differences. And I know of a wonderful woman who does generational differences work. If you're interested, I can give you her contact information. Now, this is something that's near and dear to my heart. Inclusive leadership and hiring trainings are an absolute must. And if you want to ensure an inclusive workplace and an effective ID&E strategy. A lot of the work that goes into ID&E is how are you intentionally helping people who are, people of color or women or, military veterans or people who are disabled? How do you make them effective in the workplace? Really what you need to do is focus as much as how do you create leadership that understands how to manage and lead difference? How do you help recruiters and people on interview committees? How do you make sure that they understand how to be inclusive hirers so that their biases and unintentionally oftentimes don't come into play in terms of who gets selected for your organization? How do you make sure leaders know that they should be paying attention to diversity about who gets developed? So focusing on leadership and teaching that leadership to be inclusive and understand the value of equity is going to be super powerful for workforce diversity. Now, and this is something that Yvette's mentioned a couple of times, intentionality. I strongly suggest that if you want to create the kind of workforce diversity that I think is advantageous for you as a business and for your customer base, you need to be intentional in how you hire, how you train, and how you develop. And Yvette was talking about being intentional with supplier vendor diversity. How do you purposely set goals to give a certain amount of business to minority, women-owned, veterans-owned, LGBTQ-owned businesses, et cetera, right? The same thing goes with how do you hire, how you train, and how you develop. You know what? If you want to find increased Black talent and close that gap in your organization, you should be looking for talent at historically Black colleges and universities. That's being intentional. If you have, your diverse population and mostly the lower levels of your organization, and you're not finding senior level people, be intentional how you develop the people at the lower levels and focus specifically on groups where they're going to help you close the gaps. It is perfectly fine to be just hardcore intentional on how you do this work. Next slide, please. All right. Now, the last 5 things that I'll talk about that you should be thinking about. Inclusion, diversity, and equity teams in most companies and most organizations, and you should reflect on your organizations if they even have ID&E teams, right? They tend to be the least funded and the smallest of these groups, but they're expected to make huge progress and make big shifts within organizations. In order to do so, I'm going to strongly suggest, or maybe you lead this function for your organization, is figure out a way of partnering with and scaling through your human resource function, your talent management function, and your talent acquisition function. I have, over the course of my career, I've seen this work as a four-legged stool with inclusion, diversity, and equity, HR, talent management, and talent acquisition, right? We partner and work as a team. Oftentimes, HR, for example, they're spread throughout your organization. They're everywhere. They're in leadership meetings, leadership discussions, development discussions, employee engagement discussions, or even employee resource issues or relationship issues that are happening. HR is there. So if HR understands how to integrate inclusion, diversity, and equity into how they do their work every day, that is just a way to scale what you try to do and what you need to do. So one of the things you need to do if you really want to do workforce diversity well is not isolate yourself in a silo as an ID&E lead, or don't allow that function to do that. Make sure they are partnering with HR, talent management, and talent acquisition. Align resources to the business whenever possible. Most diversity teams report up through HR or through other functions other than the business, right? I strongly suggest that where you can, even if it's not your leader of the diversity team, you should have folks aligned to the business so that they can sit in the business leadership meetings, they can sit in the development discussions, they can sit in any type of business meeting with that leader. Folks around your organizations will see that you are connected directly to the business, and that brings its certain benefits if you are sitting with the director or VP or whoever the leader is of your organization. Make sure your business resources are aligned that way. It's very important as you try to look at gaps that you need to close in different parts of the business, not even just the rolled up business, but just parts of the business. Make sure you have diversity leads who are identified directly with those business leaders, and that's what's going to make your workforce diversity program work. Know your data. And when I mean know your data, be intentional in how you collect it. Look at rolled up data. What does the whole organization look like? Just high level. Then you have to be able to create data tools and mechanisms where you can disaggregate. You should be able to look at not just women across your organization, as was discussed for Yvette, for example, but not just women, but Black women, Asian women, white women, Latinx women, Indigenous women. How are all those particular groups of women different within the organization? So you may uncover that you don't really have a gender issue or a women's issue. You may have a Black women and a Latinx issue in terms of representation, or maybe you have an Indigenous women or what. So it allows you to be even more specific. And think intersectionality, and that's something I don't have time to go into a lot today at all, but intersectionality is the notion of looking at not just one particular dimension of diversity, but looking at women who are of a particular race, or who are disabled, or who are veterans. Look at the intersections of all these diversity dimensions, because they matter. And oftentimes they help you identify where there are gaps. And the last thing I'll say with this particular piece is hire a data guru. If you have an opportunity to hire someone who can help you, create these data tools, it's fantastic. And one of the smartest things that I did is I hired a research scientist at my last role when I was the director of inclusion, diversity, and equity for worldwide operations for Amazon. I hired a research scientist, and she researched all the thorny problems and provided all the empirical research that I can then convince leaders about what we needed to do. Definitely get that done. Where you can, easy enough. Have your diversity, inclusion, equity teams report up to the CEO or somewhere within the business C-suite. That's going to enable you to create the kind of workforce that you want. And the last thing I'm going to say of the 10 things I wanted to talk to you about is advocate a tempered radical perspective and framework. And what that is, Deborah Meyerson wrote a great book called Tempered Radicals, and it was also changed, the title was changed to Rocking the Boat. I definitely recommend that you look at it if you're interested in systemic change. It's an amazing book. She advocates two different things in her book, two analogies I really love. One is rocking the boat. She suggests that you as leaders need to rock the boat and rock it hard, but don't rock it so hard that you knock yourself or others out of the boat, thus the tempered radical piece of it. Because you want to make sure that people understand you're intentional and you're serious, you want to get this work done. But if you knock yourself out of the boat, you can't affect change. If you knock other people out of the boat, you can't affect change. So I would say, for the most part, most of the time, just rock it hard enough to make sure people understand you're serious about what you're doing. Occasionally, you might have to knock someone out, quite honestly. And the second analogy she uses, and I think this is really important for all of you who I imagine are super busy, and you have enough on your plates as it is, tempered radical work around inclusion, diversity, and equity means drop a pebble that causes a ripple, that causes someone else to drop a pebble, which causes a ripple, and it causes someone else to drop a pebble, and so on. It's all those pebbles or little wins that leads to systemic change. So you don't have to recreate the wheel. You don't have to change everything. You don't have to blow something up and do it. Find a way of having an impact by just dropping a pebble. And you'll see that other people will start doing that. It's that aggregation of all those wins, as I just said, that leads to systemic change. That's the way to do diversity work. Whenever someone comes to me and says, tell me the 2 or 3 great things I need to do to create a great workforce around diversity, I know they don't understand how to do this work, because there aren't 2 or 3 big solutions that change everything. It is small, individual little things that you're going to do that are strategically focused that allow you to do this change. So next slide. I can answer questions about that later. So I'll end with this. That diversity is having a seat at the table, inclusion is having a voice, and belonging is being heard. It's not enough to create a workforce that you want that's diverse and represents the communities, the industries, and the businesses you're in if all they do is sit around the table and you think you've solved your problem. You need to create tools and mechanisms and policies and structures to make sure that you are leveraging that diversity and that people that you bring around the table are being heard. That's an integrated approach to doing this work. So last slide, please. And if you are at all interested, please reach out to me. And I hopefully when you get these slides, and I'm totally comfortable sending these out for sure, please reach out to me if you'd like. Happy to help with anything. Tracy, I think I'm 34 seconds over, my friend. Sorry about that, brother. I owe you.
No worries at all. No worries at all. Great presentation. Thank you, Eddie. All right. So it's a good news story. My name is Tracy Woods, Vice President of Operations for the American Association of Blacks in Energy. And thanks for moderating, Josh. As I mentioned earlier, good news story. For the audience, you've heard some really great solutions from Yafet and Eddie. So it's kind of like a movie in reverse. You've heard the solutions. I'll talk a little bit about the context that we see at AID. I'm going to zip through these slides. So I find when I do webinars that the audience really wants to engage. So Q&A is important, and we want to get to your questions. I saw a few in the Q&A. So I want to skip through these, and then hopefully Eddie and I and Josh will have a chance to entertain your questions. So next slide, Josh. A little bit about AID, the American Association of Blacks in Energy. We are the nation's premier energy professional association. We've got over 2,000 members, 38 chapters, and across the country, 28 states, and here in the District of Columbia, where I live. Our mission to provide direct input into the deliberations and development of energy policy, regulations, emerging technology, environmental issues, particularly as they impact the African American and other underserved communities. Next slide, Josh. Our goal, again, greater representation of African Americans in employment, leadership, business contracting, and workforce development in the energy industry. And I think Yafet, when she was talking about MOCAN, that's ideal for us. That's right there where we want to be. Next slide, Josh. So when we talk about why some of the differences and why the need for energy efficiency, I wanted to share this information about energy burden. So in the top, you see how the calculation is done when we talk about energy burden. Take what a household spends for energy, divide that by their income, and then you'll get the total energy burden for a household. The normal actually is around 6%. If a household is spending about 6% for energy, that's considered where most households are. But then if you look at the bottom, we notice that for Black households compared to white non-Hispanic households, the burden, energy burden for Black households in that comparison is 43% higher. In that middle box at the bottom, when we look at Hispanic households relative to white non-Hispanic households, the burden is down to 20%, but it's 20% higher. So we see 20% higher burden. And then for Native American households, one of the highest. Okay, and we'll talk about how we get here, but 45% higher than that of a white non-Hispanic household. Next slide, Josh. So how did we get here? And it's really about housing stock. So poor or inefficient housing stock in the communities of color. So those boxes that you saw on the previous slide along the bottom are relative to the differences. Those increases are about the housing stock. So, you know, very often getting to the root of an issue, you have to ask several questions of why. So now we're talking about inefficient housing stock. Well, why is that? Are these people making these choices openly, or how do we get to this housing issue? And so typically it's a lack of awareness or access to inefficiency program. Oh, actually, first we talk about redlining, right? So redlining, when we look at it historically and particularly major issue areas, we end up with that issue. Then when we talk about energy burden, there are programs that we talked about earlier here in this conference, but access to the program or even awareness of those programs is an issue very often in communities. So as I said, you got the success story early on because with Yafet and what they're doing, and you know what Eddie talked about in terms of DEI, these are solutions to these problems that I'm explaining here. And then income inequality. So even when having access to many of the energy efficiency programs that are available, you know, beyond the basic retrofits for energy efficiency, ability to pay to change out some of the more expensive appliances in the household, there is this wealth difference or income difference that we're aware of. Next slide, Josh. All right, so, and I'll really step through these slides pretty quickly. So what you'll see in the next several slides are the energy efficiency principle, actually the principle that we developed at AID. And in one of these slides, you'll see a date about 2008 or 2009. This principle we developed quite a while ago. There are 12 actually, but specifically with, you know, looking at concerns or energy concerns for African-American and other underserved communities. We early identified energy efficiency as something that could close the gap. So here we talk about weatherization programs, LIHEAP, which we found is typically underfunded for the number of households who qualify for LIHEAP funding. That is a program that is not funded typically at the level that it needs to be based on area of need. And one of the things, present administration, Biden administration, is looking for increased funding in LIHEAP. And then, you know, things like tax credits, consumption reduction, other incentives to get energy efficiency at the forefront. Next slide, Josh. So we talk about block grants and this, in this portion of the principle, R&D to advance technology that would get to conservation, a consumer rate making process. So when we look at energy efficiency from a regulatory perspective, rate making becomes an issue as well. And then informing and educating consumers to improve efficient use of energy in practical applications. And that not only buildings, but appliances, transportation, electronics. Okay, so we talked about awareness and education. That's a part of our principle as well. Next slide, Josh. So let's see what we have here. Again, we talk, now we can move on. Next slide. Okay, so we talk about Abe and believing that there are smart technologies that can, and we see this, you know, in the marketplace, allow consumers to control their energy usage. We talked about the Nest thermostat and other smart devices that are now available. When we wrote this, that was a nascent technology. Avoid wasting energy. Okay, so cutting off appliances when they're not in use. And believe it or not, that's still a challenge. Control how and when appliances do their jobs. And we know there's a regulatory piece of this in terms of time of use rates. But these are things that we support as a nonprofit. Next slide, Josh. Okay, so good. Did I do it? Yeah, so I've got, you got 10:34 Central, so that gives us some Q&A time, hopefully.
Absolutely. Thank you both. Pardon me. Very informative and interject. There were a couple of questions that were provided, and would encourage folks to go ahead and continue to provide those. I saw that Eddie, you had answered them online, but if you want to do them for the rest of the group verbally, we could do that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you remind me what the first question was?
Sure. The first question is, what are the role of employee resource groups in this process?
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. So as I said in my response, they're critical. Employee resource groups or affinity groups. So employee resource groups and affinity groups differ in that employee resource groups tend to be more funded, and they have a strategic role to help ID&E teams close gaps we talked about. And they play an important role in all this work with workforce development. They can, a number of things that employee resource groups can help you do, help you hire people from their constituency base. So if you have a Black employee network, they can help you in hiring events to bring in talent. They can refer talent. So they can help you in branding and marketing situations where, you know, I've seen it when I was at Starbucks, for example. We had employee resource groups come through and look at any kind of branding and marketing and ad campaigns before they went out to make sure that there weren't any unintentional, you know, blunders with how they marketed, so they can help you with that. Employee resource groups can actually help you understand in their constituency, what's the best way to approach that customer? What's the best, what do they need? What's going to make sure that the customer uses us as a company? You know, in what Tracy's talking about, you know, you could use employee resource groups. How do you use employee resource groups to make communities understand, you know, resource technology uses, right? How do you get them to help you understand what's the best way to communicate that information to my constituency base, right? So employee resource groups can play critical roles if they're embedded within a strategy, right? Sometimes what diversity leads do is they just go ahead and create employee resource groups because that's what everyone does, right? But you need to just not do it in a vacuum. Do it in a way where you're actually leveraging what they bring to the table for the goodness of your company. So that's how that happens and how that works. Tracy, anything to add to that?
No, I appreciate your if, as you said, if it's a strategic part of a strategic plan. And you're right, invaluable to the companies where I've worked, and the ones that are successful in DEI have those employee resource groups and just multiples of them, you know.
Right.
So yeah.
Yep, they're funded, that have seats at the table with executives that actually have power, and it shows. I have some really good examples we can get to if we have time. The other question, please. I know there was one.
The question was if you had thoughts on resources for level setting and how to navigate that issue.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And so what I had said in my response is, it's a great question. I think a lot of diversity professionals come in and forget to level set within organization, because if you have different types of definitions of what diversity is, what is inclusion, how does it differ from an affirmative action? What is structure, process, and policy playing with diversity? All these different things. People have different platforms they jump from. That is chaos and confusion. So what you need to do first off is level set for an organization on how you define these terms. And for diversity, for example, what I had said, you know, if there are 50 people on this call, Josh, and I said, hey, everyone, write a definition for diversity, we'd have 50 different definitions. So what I suggest is define diversity as a process. Then it's relevant and fits no matter what your situation is in a company, what groups you're in. If you're a global company, if you think of diversity as a process, it fits in Japan, in New Zealand, in Denmark, in Georgia, and you know, California. And what I mean by that is, you know, you think about diversity as a process, that diversity is about creating a workforce that represents the communities you're in, the workforce you drive, that kind of thing. So it varies on where you are. the secret is then how do you leverage that difference to be more creative and innovative in your approach? So the business case rationale, inclusion. And then if you leverage both, if those first two things are right, and you do those things, your individuals realize their potential in much greater ways. And if you actually are creating an environment where people can be really drive and thrive, your company thrives. And then here's the beauty of it. Here's how you complete the process. It's much easier to attract diverse talent to companies that have those first three things in place. It becomes a cycle. So that is the way to, if you define diversity in that fashion, it eliminates some of this, what the person said is, lack of consensus about what it is, because you're now hitting all the constituencies and everyone sees themselves represented in your definition, right? So you got to, that's what I recommend, is find ways to create definitions and shared understanding for each of these different types of definitions, right? And to the other point I'll make is, it's going to be really critical for you to understand the difference between simply creating seats at the table through inclusion and how do you create integration. So when you define it, you really need to define it to say it's not enough to create a seat at the table, but you have to create an opportunity for people to be heard. And then the final piece that you need to talk about, and it's really hard to argue this from a consensus standpoint, is how do you create equity amongst all the folks you're bringing in, not to create advantage or disadvantage for particular groups, but just to create access. Then you allow everyone to then compete, and whoever it surfaces and whoever does good work are the ones who get rewarded, but it's the access piece. So what I would say is, people are pushing back because they feel like they're going to lose something. People don't want to give up power. They don't want to give up position, right? But if you say, no, this is about creating access to groups who historically been denied, then you compete and let the best people earn those roles. So we are not doing diversity to white people, right? Being really direct. This is not about making sure white men never get promoted again. It's about making sure everyone has access to the process, and then you let the best person win and see how the benefit happens for your customers. So that's how there are certain things that you have to dive into to make sure that you are dealing with the people who are worried about consensus. Anyway, that's a kind of short, long-winded response, and I'm happy to take this offline too if you want to discuss this more. Tracy, sorry, anything else to add to that?
Yeah, no, it's great. No, great what you said. When you talked about level setting, I'm recalling some of the experiences that I've had, and that's the tough work. It requires a lot of patience, I think, on the front end. But I love the way you talked about, the end result is a process that works everywhere. And I remember the front end, and sometimes folks are not impatient to get the work done, but anxious to get that done. But it's worth taking the time, as you said, to do the level set.
Yeah, how I say that, Tracy, is you have to slow down to speed up.
Yeah.
Because if you don't slow down to level set, no matter what you do, there are going to be so much noise and chaos in the system that it's going to take you longer to get there. Slow down, get it set, get a shared understanding, make sure people understand the business case rationale if necessary, and provide the kind of resources, and then you will see your strategy speeds up and works.
Right. Great point.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Tracy, you kind of mentioned some of this, but especially with your experience on the ground, how does diversity in the energy and energy efficiency sector compare to other market sectors?
We have a significant challenge in energy, and then those energy related sectors like energy efficiency, relative to diversity, and when you compare energy to other sectors. In fact, so we're in August. Earlier this month, I believe it was, the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, Congresswoman Yvette Clarke is one that's on that committee, but led a series of workshops. And the folks that reported or testified before Congress were energy-related trade associations. So we were there with several others. And what triggered this series of workshops was a New York Times article written earlier this year that talked about the lack of diversity. And Yafet touched on this a bit, the lack of diversity at the board level, and at the C-suite level in the energy sector. So, and the Times article also noted that things had not changed relative to diversity, DE&I in the energy space over the last 5 years. So we're having to account for this lack of diversity.
You know, Josh, if you don't mind, one of the things that I would push people to do too is, I think sometimes what I've seen is when people try to compare across industries, whether it's intentional or unintentional, what ends up happening sometimes is folks then say, well, we just don't have anyone in the industry. That's why it is. So why should we even try, right? Or we're doing, you know, we're 7% above this other industry, so I feel really good about it. So like, why do we have to keep pressing? So I would just caution the folks on this to try to resist some of those discussions. And it's not about fixing problems is the way I like to talk about diversity. It's about leveraging strengths. The faster organizations and industries can get away from, let's get a fixed mindset, let's fix a problem mindset into, let's not worry about it. Let's get the types of talent we need in here that are diverse, have diverse perspectives and diverse thoughts and diverse experiences. Let's leverage that to be even better for our customers and for the experience that our people have in our companies. That is going to shift the discussion away from this problematic issue to one of strength. People want strength. They want their companies to be great. And if this is really how you are creating a mindset, I think you see a change in how people address this and want to deal with it. Don't give people these little anchors to just say, well, why should we try? It's not going to work. Right? Let's move away from that mindset to say, no, this is not what that's about. I don't know. It's just a pet peeve of mine over the years, is trying to shift people away from the whole notion of diversity being about fixing problems, when actually it should be about leveraging strengths to be even more creative and innovative for your customers, your employees, your industry, that kind of thing. I'll get off my soapbox, Josh. Sorry about that. Let me step down off that pup.
No, I completely understand that. You know, it is a different, it's a paradigm shift. It's a perspective issue. And I think what you're sharing is a positive way, a productive way to have this discussion, which I think can lower some defenses and some other things as well.
Absolutely.
So
yeah.
I appreciate that. I guess one question I have is an organization who is trying to work on this, but small, like 2.5 staff folks. Do you see the process different for, or do you have advice for smaller organizations in the energy field, right? A lot of energy efficiency companies are small. Solar companies are small. A lot of times they're just like single owners and a couple of folks. Is there different advice for small organizations, small companies compared to the big ones?
You know what, it's yes, absolutely. If you're an organization of 40 diversity professionals, what you could do with 40 diversity professionals is way different than what you can do with 2. So what I would recommend is what I said earlier, is then it's even more important to leverage and scale through other human resource functions, talent management functions, talent, acquisition function. So even if you're a small enough company and you don't even have your own recruiting force and you outsource, how you outsource, you should do what Yvette was talking about, is think about supplier vendor diversity and find an outsourced company that actually values diversity, inclusion, and equity, and actually goes to places where you'll find diversity in the kinds of people you use. So in other words, you can even scale through outsourced vendors you use. Just be intentional to make sure that they understand the value of what you want, right? I don't want the same candidates. I want a diverse slate to pick from so that we can drive this work. So you don't have the staff to do it, but you can hold people accountable for doing it, right? So you just have to find ways to scale principles, philosophy, perspectives that you have, and be absolutely tempered radical about it and say, we're not going to use that training organization because they're not, they don't have diverse trainers, they don't have diversity as a perspective and part of the training they're going to do. We're going to use this one because they have. That's how you do it. Is if you don't have the people to do it, you hold tight to the philosophy perspective of how you do it. Then you leverage, and the other thing that I would say is, you may have a small diversity team or a small group of HR professionals, leverage the people in your organization, find out what they do, what they know, get to know them, because they may have community ties. They may have a skill set that you're not aware of that you could leverage them, that they may be able to do a little bit of work off the side of their desks. The other thing that you can do in that situation is create tools and mechanisms that allow people to integrate inclusion, diversity, and equity into how they do their work. So your employees can become your, as people used to joke at Amazon, they create Eddie's army. That's what they would say, is I would create people who understand totally what to do so that I don't have to be everywhere, but I have an army of people everywhere. So if you have 20-person organization, make sure 20 people understand inclusive leadership. So when they do it, you don't have to be there. They can help you do it. So you see gains happen in a tempered radical fashion, as opposed to you having to be in every talent management meeting, every promotion meeting, every hiring decision meeting, every meeting with a disgruntled employee. You don't have to be there because people know how to integrate inclusion, diversity, and equity into what they do every day. That's how I would say that you would do it. And then just hammer people till they let you hire resources and bring people in. So,
yeah, I think the one thing that is consistent, large or small enterprise, is about the goals. And we've talked about that throughout the day. You know, what gets measured gets done, is what we used to say in the industry. So I think if there are goals around these objectives, just like any other business objective, that goes a long way, large or small enterprise, to meeting diversity goals. Yeah.
Tracy, I agree. And it just reminds me of a point to make too, is in small organizations, it's even more critical to make sure your reporting line is into the business or into CEOs, because you may be small, but then you can have a bigger stick that you can carry to then drive some of that advocacy and some of that accountability that Tracy just talked about too, right? So yeah, there are things you can do, small, large, and different. It's about being intentional and honest and direct, and tying it to the business.
That is some fantastic insight and data. I hope everyone is able to take something home with you there, to bring to your own organization. Tracy, Eddie, thank you so much. And Eddie, thank you so much for the last minute hop in. I appreciate it.
No worries. My pleasure.
Yeah, a great panel. Thank you both so much.
Thank
you, Josh.
We can connect, Tracy. Reach out.
Okay.
All right.
We'll do. All right. Great. All right.
Our next session